Thank you. Thank you very much. The title of my talk is the intercultural orientation in English language teaching as a way of promoting students' transformation. As you said, my name is Jose Aldemar Alvarez. I'm from Colombia, and I wanted to start by first thanking and congratulating the organizers of this event. I think this is a great initiative. And I also want to thank all my colleagues who are participating as presenters. And finally, I'd like to invite people who are joining us to donate or to invite others to do it. My talk is about culture. And I think we can all agree that culture and language are intertwined, that language is culture and teaching is culture. And if you look back at the tradition of language teaching in ELT, we find that it's been highly dominated by what some authors have called the culturalist orientation, which is this emphasis on factual information, behavioral and attitudinal patterns, and historical information about the people or the cultural practices of the target country. And the way this has materialized is through approaches such as the very well-known 4F approach, that involves folk, dances, festivals, fairs, and food, or the tour guide approach, which is this idea of teaching our students about the landmarks of the target culture, such as monuments, rivers, cities, and so on. Some other teachers resort to the by the way approach, which is this sporadic treatment of behavioral issues or anecdotes, particularly those teachers who have been abroad, they do this a lot. And finally, there's one approach, which is the Frankenstein approach, which is basically the combination of all the previous approaches. So, one of the main characteristics of this culturalist orientation to culture and language teaching is that it considers an intercultural encounter from the ethnic and the nationalist perspective. In other words, it thinks that an intercultural encounter can only happen when people from two different countries engage in interaction. Um, but then the intercultural orientation in ELT, um, although this is old, this appeared during the 50s, late 50s, early 60s. But in language teaching as a movement, it started strongly during the late 1990s. And the focus was on intercultural communication and its impact on the speakers involved in interaction. So the way I see intercultural communication is a process of meaning making, is meaning making, meaning exchange, meaning negotiation between members of distinct distinct social groups and their identity affiliations. And when I talk about identity affiliations, I refer to the affiliations that we build through the processes of socialization. And we go through processes of primary socialization, which takes place in the household, in our family communities. And then we go through another process of secondary socialization, which usually takes place outside, when you go to school, when you go to high school, and within the neighborhood and the community in general. So, and all of these processes of socialization, which basically helped us build our identity, is determined by environmental, where you grow up, linguistic, the languages you're exposed to, national, racial, ethnic, political, sex, gender, physical, and social differences. All of these categories um, impinge on the way we construct our identity. So what this definition is important because it allows us to think of intercultural encounters from a different perspective, and not only from the perspective of the culturalist approach, and not only because there is a transnational interaction, there is intercultural communication, but intercultural communication can take place within the same within the members of social group. In other words, you will see that in a place like Colombia, when people from different regions interact, they may be materializing an intercultural encounter because every one of them has been socialized in different social groups, and they have different affiliations, therefore different identities, which will come out during an interaction, and they are determined by gender, by their languages, their language variety they are speaking. If we have different Spanish varieties in Colombia, and so on. So, and this consideration of all of these elements that intervene in intercultural encounters will help us understand more the concept of intercultural competence. And I'm using here Lirico and Scarino, who propose some elements that the IC will involve, like accepting that one's practices are influenced by cultures in which one participates, and so are those of the interlocutors. What I was saying, all of these all of these affiliations will materialize in an encounter. Accepting that there is no right way to do things, valuing one's culture by other cultures, using language to explore culture, because as I said, language is culture in itself. Using language, finding personal ways of engaging in intercultural interaction, using one's existing knowledge of cultures as a resource for learning about new cultures. And this is something very important since we're teaching languages, how everything that students bring in, they are semiotic resources, cultural semiotic resources they're bringing along with them. And all of them are diverse ways of living and staying in the world that are possible to be exploited in the classroom beyond thinking that it's only this idea of, oh, interculturality only happens when you interact with someone from another country. All of these students have different sociocultural practices that they come to the classroom, and then we have to reflect about them. And finding a personal intercultural style and identity, which is, as you know, something that happens when you learn a second or foreign language. You develop an identity, you develop a style that has to do with how you associate and construct an identity regarding the language. Um, so the main distinction between the culturalist approach and the intercultural orientation is that the intercultural orientation is transformative. As I was saying, if we know that there are all of these identity affiliations we perform and we enact in our classrooms, and in a language classroom, we were able to think that's possible to allow them to be in the language classroom and bring students to reflect about them, this may have transformational effects on students. And I'm citing again Lirico and Scarina here. It says, they say a cultural perspective implies the development of knowledge about a culture, which remains external to the learner and is not intended to confront or transform the learner's existing identity, practices, values, attitudes, beliefs, and worldwide. So teaching students about factual information, how the other culture members behave, that's okay, but that's not all. There's all other things that students have to think of. And so in an intercultural perspective, there's a possibility for transformational engagement in the act of learning. So just to close, because I know I'm running out of time, the most important thing in this perspective is that students understand that there's several diversities marked by age, race, ethnicity, language varieties, gender, that are valid within a language classroom. And so if we get our students to think about all of these topics, maybe there's the chance that tolerance and recognition may emerge, may develop in students, and then they understand that there are other ways of staying and being in the world. And so that's, I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.